So, Stephen Halbrook is one of the leading experts on the historical underpinnings of the Second Amendment and practical knowledge in this area of law. Coming up next.
Hey, did you know we have a world-class training school at San Diego Flight Training International? Pilots can fly 360 out of 365 days a year. We're close to the ocean, deserts, and we have mountains too. And we're right next to an international border and a major military base. San Diego is one of the best places to learn how to fly in the world. Learn to fly in the heart of San Diego right at Montgomery Field. Getting started is easy. Give them a call at 858-569-1822. You can learn to fly at SDFTI. That's 858-569-1822. If Action Jackson can do it, so can you.
Definitely.
I know you can fly.
Of course.
Just throw you out the window.
There we go.
So who you got?
So we should have Stephen Halbrook here. Stephen, are you online?
I sure am.
Well, Stephen, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. You know, it's funny. I was going to, because you've written a number of books, at least 10, I think. And, I've read 2 of them for sure because, and I'd forgotten about it because, Michael was telling me, yeah, you're going to have Stephen Halbrook on there. And I said, okay, yeah, what's he done? And yeah, Michael was saying he wrote one of your favorite books. You were raving about this thing. And I completely forgot about the Founder's Second Amendment. And, I'd gone home and I can't find the thing. And it's bugging me to death because I would never give that book away. I'd have kept that one for a reference. But I did find the other one that I really enjoyed too that I've read was the gun control in Nazi occupied France, which I thought was just really, really interesting, especially given what's going on, in our country and what you see the anti-gun folks doing. And, when you read, your book, you covered that so well in there, and it's just, it's frightening to see the similarities and how that stuff works.
What's really incredible, quite a parallel, is gun control in Nazi-occupied France and what's going on right now in Ukraine. It's the same kind of issue. Before the Russian attack, most guns were probably unregistered in Ukraine. There's these international gun control organizations that write up how good or bad each country's gun prohibitions are, and gunpolicy.org is the one. And they were lamenting the fact that in Ukraine, most gun owners were undocumented. They actually used the term undocumented. That meant their guns were not registered. And so when the Russian attack came, guess what? Would you rather be an undocumented gun owner or a documented gun owner? Because the first thing they're going to do is go to the police station, any village they encounter, they're going to find out the gun registration records, the hunting license records also. The same thing in France. They had instituted gun registration in 1935, and lo and behold, in 1940, the Nazis took over, and they used the French police as their helpers. That was the term of the armistice, that the French government would collaborate with their occupation. And so how could it be any better? They had the gun owner records. And the Nazis imposed a rule of if you don't turn in your guns within 24 hours, you get shot. And so how could it be any better for a gun control world? It just doesn't get any better than that.
Well, see, and that's the only real. There is really no legitimate reason to register guns for the government to know that kind of information, other than for confiscation. It's a prerequisite for confiscation. And that's exactly what seems to happen over and over again. And just reading about that, I remember seeing that in your book, and just the fact that you had to turn in your guns by a certain time, or the penalty, I think, was death. I think that's what they were doing. They were shooting people for not turning them in. And even with that as the penalty, there were still apparently a lot of people that weren't turning them in.
Right. That was the impetus for the French resistance. They were able to have some arms, not enough. It was never enough, but they were able to start the resistance movement with some arms that they had refused to register and never got turned in. And the interesting part about the Nazi occupation was that they would shoot people regularly for gun ownership. They would publish it in the newspaper as a warning, and yet these French people kept doing it again. They weren't turning them in. So 3 or 4 times the Nazis would allow a gun turn in, a period like a week or 10 days when, you can turn your gun in and we won't kill you. And of course that led to controversy. They were just shooting people the week before, and now you can just turn it in. It's in the gun amnesty, and there you have it. So, in the Ukraine, we had the situation. First, they were under Soviet rule. The Soviet Union broke up, so they inherited the Russian gun ownership policy, which was nobody gets guns unless party members or influential people say you can get them. And so the Ukraine never instituted a gun law. And in fact, and instead, it was a system of favoritism. Unfortunately, Ukraine was known for corruption, and this is one of the other areas where it existed. So if you could convince your friends in the government you could do them favors and they would give you guns, and you could be a gun owner. At any rate, one thing that was positive is you could buy AR-15 rifles, or if you could afford it, or AK-47 or AK-74 rifles. You were allowed actually to buy rifles. You could not buy handguns. The only people who could get handguns were reporters, and they could only fire rubber bullets. They apparently had a number of reporters who were injured or killed. So that leads us up to, let me focus on a couple of years for a second here. In 2013, the Ukrainian Law Review asked me to write a analysis of the Second Amendment. They were publishing a complete edition of the Ukrainian Law Review on the American Bill of Rights. And myself and Joyce Malcolm, we both made contributions on the Second Amendment, and they published it. So there was interest in legal circles in adopting something like the Second Amendment. That was 2013. And in 2014, there was actually a proposal in their parliament for, I would call it the Second Amendment on steroids. It included provisions for mandatory military training, not conscription, but training, a specific right to fight invaders, and then the right to keep and bear arms to protect yourself, your family, your home, your country, to resist tyranny. It had a laundry list of really great ideas. It was an improvement on our own Second Amendment. So that was proposed in the parliament in 2014. Just after that, however, was when the Russians invaded in the eastern part of Ukraine. And so they were distracted. That never got adopted. And then that leads us up to this year. And unfortunately, Zelensky, the prime minister, had been opposed to gun reforms. There's a gun owners association in Ukraine, and they've been trying to push a more liberal regime of gun ownership and recognition of the constitutional right. So then they get invaded. The day before the invasion, Zelensky has a change of heart, and they give out like 25,000 rifles in Kyiv to people who were willing to sign up for the territorial defense. And so they went from like making it hard on gun owners to all of a sudden, here, take an AK-74, please help us.
Yeah,
and so you've got. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, what I was going to ask you was, two things. Is, what was the situation just prior to the invasion? I mean, in terms of gun ownership in the Ukraine, was it pretty widespread or not so much at all? And then, the second thing is, the government's handing out, these rifles to people. The problem is if you don't own them, you probably don't train with them. And now you're going to go up against trained soldiers with them. I think that's probably a less than optimal situation. What was the situation when they started there?
Well, you're absolutely right about the training issue. And in fact, I had to laugh in the newspaper. It said that this was 2 or 3 days before the invasion actually started. Everybody knew it was coming. They started training people who didn't have training. I mean, that's like a day late and a dollar short for that. I mean, better than nothing. But you probably saw news reports. They're giving guns out in showing people, well, here's how you put a cartridge in the chamber. Here's how the gun operates, and here's how the sights work. So yeah, they were really late on that. But I have seen reports where in areas where the Russians have conquered some of these cities and villages, they do get the registration records, such as they are, and they look the people up, obviously, and they're probably shooting them. It's the same pattern. I mean, that was what the Nazi policy was all over Europe. I focused on occupied France in that book that you mentioned, but that's what's happening. And gee whiz, if I was a gun owner there, I would not want my gun registered. You don't want to be on their blacklist. So, of course, here in our own country, this is a lesson that should be learned. And it's kind of ironic. The anti-gun crowd, everybody, they're all cheering for the Ukrainians. And then when somebody says something about, well, yeah, doesn't that show you something positive about gun ownership and not having registration records and all that? Then they whine and cry and say, oh, you shouldn't be making analogies like that. But it's right on point. Ukraine is an object lesson in why we have the Second Amendment and why we need the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and it is, and along those lines too. Just coming back to our country for a bit, with are you familiar with the bill that the three senators just proposed? I think it was Cory Booker, Menendez, and Blumenthal about a federal kind of licensing scheme for people to buy guns.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
They tried this in 1968, and when the Gun Control Act was being debated. There were about 4 different bills, and just by coincidence, I've read those debates again recently, and they were all defeated. Americans don't go for that. They don't go for federal gun licensing, federal registration. They don't even go for it at the state level. I mean, I know you're in California. I know everybody there has their guns registered just like the government told them to do, like not. I mean, I think, 200,000 might have gotten registered out of millions that were required to be registered. I mean, nobody trusts the government when they want to know about your guns. There's only one purpose for that, just eventually to confiscate them.
Yeah, and that's exactly my thought on that subject. Stephen, can you hang on for the next segment here? We got to cut to a break, and then we'll be back, and we'll pick this back up again.
Okay, we'll do.
All right, buddy. Thanks. PRMI Mortgage, primeres.com/Alpine. If you're looking to buy, refi, or maybe you're just considering a reverse mortgage, call our local mortgage guy that you can trust. Call Chris Wiley at PRMI Mortgage. For nearly 25 years, Chris has been helping local San Diegans with all their mortgage needs. They make it easy. Work with a friendly expert team, and they will help you get the best deal on a mortgage. So give Chris a call at 619-722-1303 or primeres.com/Alpine. All right, Joe.
All right, so Stephen, we're back. To leave it off, we were talking about the bill that Booker is proposed there, and you were saying, it's all old hat, really. It's been, that kind of stuff's been defeated before, and it's interesting, because I was reading about that, and what they're proposing. It's funny because they want to have a license. So if I wanted to buy a gun, I've got to go to the federal government for a license. The federal government decides whether or not they're going to give me the license. I have to use the license within 30 days. The license is good for one firearms purchase. And then on top of that, they say the license will expire in 5 years, which I guess I'm thinking that, because that didn't make sense to me, and I'm thinking that's their way of getting around this isn't a registration scheme.
Right. They want to have it expire, hoping that some people will let it expire, then they can confiscate them. And they want to just keep coming at you, making you probably pay a fee to renew it. The District of Columbia tried the same thing. After the Heller case in the Supreme Court, we had a case called Heller 2 and then Heller 3, 2 different more cases, where we challenged other D.C. gun laws. And one of the laws was that every 3 years you had to renew your registration or it would be canceled. And it was just a trap for people who didn't get the notice or were whatever distracted. So we actually got that thrown out by the federal court in the District of Columbia Appeals Court as not having any kind of basis, considering that the Second Amendment obviously protects the right to keep and bear arms. But I'll tell you one thing: if they want to talk about gun licensing, here's a nice topic. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. The Supreme Court's going to decide it by the end of June. It's a challenge to the New York State may issue gun licensing.
And that's good. We could roll right into that. That was going to be my next question. So go ahead.
Yeah. And the interesting thing for me was that a week before the Supreme Court said they were going to hear that case, my latest book came out. It's called The Right to Bear Arms, a Constitutional Right of the People or a Privilege of the Ruling Class, ? And the answer is obvious there. I mean, the Second Amendment clearly protects that right. But I think New York and the other 5 states that are may issue, they're going to get it stuck to them. That's your state, New Jersey, Maryland, Hawaii, the usual suspects. It's most likely the court is going to invalidate those kinds of laws. I mean, what other constitutional right do you exist that you have to ask, play Mother May I, ask permission to exercise it, and then they turn you down most of the time? That's the New York scheme. So I know in California, in some places, you can get licenses to carry. Other places, no. It's just up to the local sheriff or police discretion. So, I mean, what kind of constitutional right is that anyway? It's you don't ask permission to, so I have to get permission not to require you to get a search warrant if you want to search my house, or I have to get permission for free speech. I mean, I think we probably have 5 or 6 solid votes to overturn the New York licensing scheme.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that too. I'm curious to see how they, how broadly or how narrowly they rule on that, because really it's time. We're either going to have a Second Amendment, we're going to have a Constitution, or we're not. And, I mean, you could look at all these rules, and I'm not an attorney, but I mean, I look at most of these gun control laws, and I don't see how they don't infringe on my Second Amendment right. So it'll be interesting to see, what do you see as the reactions of states like New Jersey and California, based on the ruling, hopefully, that we're going to get from the Supreme Court?
Well, and once again, this is what I anticipate. It's not a promise. You never know what a court might do. So, but what I anticipate is that they'll simply cross out one phrase in the New York law. It's a phrase that you not only do you have to have lack of criminal background or maybe some training, you have to have some training, some things like that, but you have to have a proper cause or a good reason to want to carry a gun. That's all the court has to do is cross that out. And then you can go on your merry way. If you meet all the other requirements, then you can get the carry license. And it's going to be the same in the other states. New Jersey, whatever their equivalent phrase is to good reason or proper purpose or whatever, just cross that out. It's not like the gun control laws that exist are going to all of a sudden vanish. It's just that you cut out that part that's the most unconstitutional and then allow people to get carry permits. Now, we know that half the states, or maybe it's 23 states now. Well, let's see. It's
I think it's up to 25, the constitutional carry.
Yeah, 26, I think it might be, or 25 at least. It's constitutional carry, no permit or license required. And then all the states except for 6 have either that and or a permit system that's by and large pretty much fair in the sense that everybody who lacks a felony record and, mental problems, things like that, you can get the permit to carry. So that's the baseline of what we're asking for. And we'll see. It's going to be by the end of June. And there's another big case that people are getting upset about. I think that some people are going to get upset about that one, the woke people, and let them get upset.
And that's, on that subject too, do you think the all the fuss about this leak on the Roe opinion, do you think that's going to have any impact at all on the Second Amendment opinion?
No, I don't think so. I mean, these justices have pretty tough skin. They're not going to back down because people are going out to their houses and trying to intimidate them. They're not that type. They're going to stick with their guns, so to speak. I'm certain that there's an opinion, just like in the Roe versus Wade case. There's an opinion already drafted, and it's being circulated. And the way it works up there, for these controversial cases, maybe 2, 3, even 3 months in advance, they might have a basic draft, and then that allows every justice to have their say. If somebody wants to, if one person writes the majority opinion, let's say Justice Thomas, but Justice Gorsuch wants to add some to it in a concurrent opinion, it gives them time to do that. And if Justice Sotomayor wants to write a dissenting opinion, or Justice Kagan, they get plenty of time to give it their best shot to make it most refined as possible. That's why they put these big cases off to the end, so that all the justices can elaborate to their heart's extent in terms of what they want to get their 2 bits into the decision. So, I don't think neither case is going to be involved with the other in terms of, influencing it. But one thing that's so critical and such a difference, many people denied for years, and some people still deny, the Second Amendment does not protect the right of the people to keep and bear arms. It protects the National Guard. But versus Roe versus Wade, the right to abortion is clearly in the Constitution. I mean, here you have one right that's explicit that they try to deny, and then you have another so-called right that they make up, basically. So we'll see what happens with both of those. But, if you're a betting person, I think your money would be best directed to 2 different possible outcomes in those cases.
Well, it's ironic, too, living in a May issue state, because we just recently, probably the last 5 or 6 years, got our concealed carry rights back in San Diego. And that was due mostly to our group, the San Diego County gun owners, pressuring the sheriff to change his policy out here. And, it's interesting, and I think I may have read this in your book, actually, just the history of that May issue law, or that idea, goes way back to the Civil War, basically, and as a way to keep certain people unarmed. And, and that's how it's always been used, actually, really up until nowadays by certain governments in our country, I guess. And it's ironic that some people argue to continue that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's an issue I've covered in the latest book, The Right to Bear Arms, and also a book called Securing Civil Rights. In the Old South, in the slave codes, slaves could not have a gun, but a free person of color, so-called, could get a license, and it was May issue, so it was up to their discretion of the authorities. Then after the war, the black codes were enacted, and so any African American who wanted to carry a gun or to even have one would have to get a license. There was no standard for it. The local authority would either give them the license or not.
Yeah, and that's and that's what we have in California too. We have 58 counties, and it's up to the county, usually the sheriff, to do that. It's exactly where that comes from, that history.
Right, and that was never applied to citizens. Unfortunately, black people were not considered citizens. They were made citizens by the 14th Amendment, adopted in 1868. But you don't treat citizens that way, and the reason given for the excuse given for having that kind of licensing system was they're not really citizens. And so after they were made citizens, recognized as citizens, African Americans had all the rights as everybody else. And yet you still had, in the Jim Crow era, you have licensing laws that were discretionary, and so the authorities would determine who got a license and who didn't. And of course, New York, the Sullivan Law, 1911, that was aimed at Italian immigrants. There was a lot of ethnic prejudice against them, and you had the Irish bosses led by Big Tim Sullivan in New York City, who wanted to monopolize political power. And they swayed elections. They enforced the law in a very unequal way. They made pretense after the law passed. They made pretense gun seizures where they would plant a gun in your pocket, and so all the way up to nowadays, you have in the New York City licensing section, you have the police who administer it being charged with corruption and bribery to issue licenses.
All right. Hey, man, great interview. Thank you very, very much. Look forward to having you back on down the road.
All right, guys. Good to talk to you again. Take care.
Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. You can watch us live every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, right here on our YouTube channel, or if you're in the San Diego area, you can listen to us on 1170 a.m. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform for free. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can help restore and protect the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.